You can defend the core. What is the core? It is not a legal term. There is a core in an apple. Defend the core of the constitutional identity. And in doing so, it is difficult to say what is the constitutional identity. And it is even more difficult to say what is the core. But you can do that anyway, only in cases in which the European jurisdiction does not grant legal protection. This is an immense relativization. Certainly, the national principle was defended by the Federal Constitutional Court, and it was maintained. So the democratic legitimization of the Union still emanates from the member states' parliaments and not from the European Parliament. The Court repeated that the European Parliament is not a real parliament. I have told you about that before. You know it. It has been confirmed. The Parliament does not represent a people. There is no such thing as a European people from a legal point of view. And the Parliament has not been elected equally. It can thus only add to and strengthen the legitimization of politics, the Court says. But we all know that the national parliaments do not know anything about European policy. They do not even know what is going on there, and they do not care at all. How should they legitimize the European policy? That is only a formal process, and it is legitimized, the Court repeatedly says. This is the most important notion of the judgment by the principles of limited conferral. It would be right if it would be correct. From a dogmatic point of view, it is right. But the Court did not check, not a single case, whether the principle of limited conferral was realized or maintained or not. The principle is completely violated. The powers of the European Union are so incredible infinite. You can read about it in my publications, in the lawsuit that was published everywhere, anyway on my homepage. I have written hundreds of pages about the fact that the conferrals are infinite. The whole social policy, including the labor policy, pensions policy, health insurance policy, everything can be regulated by the Union. The complete trade policy, which is so faithful to us. Trade policy means world economic policy. We must realize that the European Union is nothing else than a region of the world market. We cannot make an independent trade policy. The so-called export champion, which is no benefit, Germany can do neither, and neither can Austria. But the social pressure is being created by the world market, and behind there is, by definition, the one world concept. Everything is going into that direction, and that means, as a matter of fact, a world state and a world government, which can only be despotic. It is impossible to organize a democracy with 7 billion people now and someone 10 billion or more. Democracy means the small unit. In Europe, these are the nations. And this is what Mr. Dalton has explained very well before. My basic conception is exactly the same as Mr. Dalton's. That means it is republican. Also, in the sense of the sentence by Cicero, as I understand it, res publica, res populi, which means that public affairs are a matter of the people. But that presupposes the existence of peoples, and these peoples must be able to survive. And the democratic principle, the state under the rule of law principle, the social state principle, they go together, by necessity, if they are to be realized, with the national principle. There is no social realization without the national principle. That is what I call a European Europe. L'Europe de patrie, l'Europe d'État, the Europe of nations. Everything else is leading astray away from democracy, from the state of law, from the social state. And in that respect, the Federal Constitutional Court did not help at all, because it did not check at all on the essential aspect, the democratic legitimization, and does not want to admit that the power of the Union is infinitely wide. And if this is accepted, well, where does the core of the constitutional identity begin? The trip there probably covers a greater distance than the trip to Saturn. We would be able to get to Mars? No. We would never reach these borders. That is the situation of resistance. But it must not go that far. And so the Constitutional Court denies, I now want to emphasize the democratic aspect, that the European Union has long since become a federal state, a legitimate federal state for sure, a federal state without a people, without a constitutional people. That means without human beings. But it is not constitutional. It has no constitutional law that was given to it by these people. But the Union has the power of a federal state, has the competences, has the authority of what I call existing statehood, but not constitutional. That means to be an existential state that would have to be legitimized democratically. Why not? For a very simple reason. The peoples would have to be asked if they want such a state. All the peoples, not only the Irish, they all would have to conduct a plebiscite if legal aspects were considered. And the Federal Constitutional Court affirms this dogmatics. They would have to repeal their constitutional laws. For example, that all power proceeds from the people. That's how it's put down in the Austrian constitution as well as in the German constitution. And would have to say, a part of the state power proceeds from the European people. And so the democratic subject would have to be changed. For example, from the Austrian people to the European people, at least partially. I think that the integration politicians would not receive the consent of the people. No people would agree to that.
Kein Volk würde dem zustimmen. Da kann man noch so viel wirtschaftlichen Druck ausüben. Deswegen wird es nicht gemacht.
And that is why they have developed the European Union to a functional federal state that is not legitimized. And the grand lie of the Federal Constitutional Court in Germany is to say it is legitimized by the national parliaments because these parliaments can foresee and account for the European politics. Of course, not a single word of this is true. It may be correct in terms of dogmatics, but it is far from reality. This is merely a crutch. They can do everything, since democracy has long since transformed into a party state. And Austria does not rank behind Germany, for in reality we are reigned, that is the favorite word of the Federal Constitutional Court. But my favorite word is freedom, and freedom and reign are incompatible. Free people do not need an imperial order. They create an order for themselves, an order for the common weal, the public good. And that is exactly what is laid down in the Irish Constitution. No constitution expressed it so well. The obligation of the state and the Irish people, of every individual citizen, the obligation to morality.
Verpflichtung des Staates und jedes einzelnen Iren, Bürgers, zur Sittlichkeit, also zur Moral,